He was a hero to Iran, a threat to the United States. Hundreds of thousands are mourning the death of Iran's top general. But did the US save American lives by killing him, or has his death set two bitter foes on the path to war? Hello, I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is the US-Iran crisis after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Hello and welcome to the first newsmakers of 2020. The new decade has begun with fears of war between the United States and Iran. When President Donald Trump gave the order to kill the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, he said it was to stop a war, not start one. But the crisis between Washington and Tehran is escalating. Soleimani had been called the most powerful operative in the region, with an influence stretching right across the Middle East. In Iran, he was regarded as second only to the supreme leader. Tehran has vowed to retaliate militarily. Some say Soleimani was so important to Tehran, if it doesn't avenge his death, it won't avenge anyone. Adam Pletz reports.
Qasem Soleimani's coffin sways above the heads of his mourners. Arguably Iran's second most powerful man, the commander of the Quds force was assassinated in a US drone strike near Baghdad's international airport on Friday. Washington says Soleimani is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of US service members.
Qasem Soleimani has been killed, and his bloody rampage is now forever gone. He was plotting attacks against Americans, but now we've ensured that his atrocities have been stopped for good.
Washington says Tehran has been using Iranian-backed militias to attack US personnel at Iraqi bases. The death of an American contractor in a rocket attack in December led to retaliatory US airstrikes, which killed 25 members of the Kataib Hezbollah militia days before Soleimani was targeted. Iran denies involvement in attacks on US personnel and says the militia Soleimani controlled have instead been instrumental in the fight against Daesh. Iran says it will take military action to avenge Soleimani's death. It controls or influences militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon and Yemen, potentially placing US allies Israel and Saudi Arabia in the firing line. It could also threaten oil transportation through the Strait of Hormuz or attack Saudi oil facilities, as it was accused of doing in September 2019. President Donald Trump says he's identified 52 Iranian locations, including cultural sites, which could be bombed if Iran retaliates. In Iraq, the government, which is beset by domestic woes, is caught between its two allies and fears an escalation could lead to war on its territory.
بعدما حصل الاتفاق النووي ازداد تشدد الولايات المتحدة مع إيران وبدأت تطرح معنا ومع غيرنا سياسة إما معي أو ضدي ولا أمر آخر بينهما ويقينا إن هذا موقف يصعب على العراق تبنيه.
On Sunday, the Iraqi parliament voted to expel all US forces, leaving the final decision in the hands of the incoming government. If US forces are asked to leave, Trump says sanctions will be imposed on Iraq. Washington maintains Soleimani's assassination has left the world a safer place, but as Iran says it will resume uranium enrichment without restrictions and threatens to retaliate against US military targets, is that really the case? Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
So let's go to our panel. Rob Maness is a retired US Air Force colonel. Matthew Ho is a veteran of the Iraq War, also a board member of Veterans for Peace. And Mohammad Marandi is a professor at Tehran University. Gentlemen, thank you so much indeed for joining us on The Newsmakers. Rob, shall we start with the legality of the killing of Soleimani, but also the fact that doesn't it seem to you that it's already started to backfire on the United States because of that decision taken in the Iraqi parliament on Sunday to request that American troops leave the country?
Well, let's take the Parliament decision first, and thank you for having me on. Only quorum was only achieved by about 4 in that parliamentary session, and the resolution that was passed was non-binding. The folks like the Kurds actually boycotted that session. If you see the pictures, you'll see only about half of the seats are full. So we'll see what the outcome is of that, but I don't believe that you could even take that as a backfire at all at this point. From a legal perspective, 2 issues with that, sir. The authorization to use military force here in the United States by the United States Congress has been in place since shortly after the 9/11 attacks in September of 2001. And a second authorization to authorize combat forces and combat operations in the country of Iraq was passed in 2002, just before the war started in 2003 from an American perspective. So the President of the United States, including President Obama and President George W. Bush, all had authorization from Congress, and that's Congress's policy decision to authorize those operations. So from that regard, this operation was authorized, but it really wasn't needed because it was a self-defense operation. Mr. Soleimani, the general, was commanding and controlling the Hezbollah military militia, and that militia has been responsible for killing an American citizen that was a contractor, wounding American military forces, and of course the storming of the U.S. Embassy in the Green Zone of Iraq, which is American territory, just like it's the territory of any other country for their embassies.
Okay, well, certainly the UN Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings, Agnes Kalamard, seems to think that actually the assassination of Soleimani was most likely unlawful. But you know what? The legality of the killing is not going to change the fact that he is dead. He's going to be buried on Tuesday in his hometown of Kerman. But Mohammad Marandi, let's just pick up on what Rob has said there about Soleimani directing Iranian proxies and the Americans accusing those Iranian proxies of killing at least 600 American service members in Iraq alone. What's the feeling in Iran about that accusation in particular?
Well, your guest makes these accusations, but he doesn't even know the proper name of the group that is a part of the Popular Mobilization Force, which is under the authority of the Iraqi government. Kataib Hezbollah, their troops that were bombed were on the Syrian-Iraq border, 500 kilometers away from where the American was killed, and only 8 of them were killed. The 20-some others were killed were soldiers and police officers. And the Americans, within 1 day, acting as they always do, judge, jury, and executioner, they carried out the strike. They claimed they determined who it was. But when the Prime Minister told them, when the Americans told the Prime Minister that they're going to carry out the attack, the Prime Minister said they should not do it. They ignored him. When he asked for the intelligence, they refused to give it to him. And now we know that Trump was lying, because the Iraqi Prime Minister in Parliament yesterday stated quite openly that General Soleimani was supposed to meet him. And he was going to meet him to discuss a letter from the Saudis, because the Prime Minister was mediating, and the Prime Minister also said Trump knew about it and that he thanked him for it. So this is a game of deception. Trump lied that he was there to carry out some sort of operation. He was there to meet the Prime Minister. And this is, of course, how the Americans behave. They lied their way into Iraq, destroyed the country. And we have Pompeo as the Secretary of State, who said, when I was in the CIA, we had courses. Laughingly, he said, we were taught how to steal, to lie, and to cheat. So anything that comes out of the United States is suspect, to say the least. And then, of course, at the end of the day, what the American media does, and much of the British media, is that someone comes in and they say an unnamed intelligence source confirmed that this was about to happen, and then the media says, oh, right, that's how it is. So the media in the United States is very closely linked to power, even though the differences with Trump are very extensive. But when it comes to foreign policy, we don't see that sort of thing in the United States.
Okay, listen, we'll talk about the influence of Iran and the United States in Iraq in just a few minutes, but let's look at the relationship as it's been degrading between the US and Iran over the past few weeks. Matthew, has the Trump administration miscalculated the effect of the killing of Soleimani?
Thank you for having me on. I don't know if they miscalculated. Certainly there are members of the Trump administration, as well as many people within the national security establishment or foreign policy establishment of the United States that have wanted war with Iran going back to 1979. Very similar to with the United States relationship with Cuba. There were revolutions in both countries overthrowing the dictators and the secret police forces that the United States had put in power. They were more or less popular revolutions in both countries, and the United States has wanted revenge for that, bolstered in part by a lot of American corporations, individuals who lost money because, or possessions or property because of the change in government in both countries. So the desire for a war in the United States, or a war with Iran, has been foremost in a discussion among American foreign policy elites for quite a while now. I think mainly, or I would say you could say that the difference between many in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is just how far they want to push it. I have a feeling that right now in Tehran, there are very serious discussions, but the Iranians have to be very, very careful. While Iran could have some singular successes in retaliating against the United States, possibly even, say, sinking an American ship or shooting down an American aircraft, the ability of the United States military, as has clearly been demonstrated over the last 70 or 80 years, is nothing to be dismissed. The United States has the capability to not just destroy the Iranian military, but also destroy all Iranian critical infrastructure in a matter of weeks, while losing hardly any personnel or resources itself, besides the expenditure, of course, of cruise missiles, bombs, et cetera. So this is a very dangerous situation for the Iranians. I feel they probably feel like they have their hands tied to a degree. And unfortunately, it's the situation for the people of the Middle East continues, or the greater Middle East, extending through Afghanistan and Pakistan, continues to be one of unimagined suffering. I mean, millions have died, tens of millions have become refugees, and there is literally no end in sight for this and for the suffering of those people.
Just one more question to you, Matthew, before we let you go. How confused do you think Donald Trump's Middle East policy is? He's always obviously hated Obama's nuclear deal, but he says he wants to pull America out of foreign, what should we call them, adventures. But yet he's sending troops. He already has after the Saudi Aramco facilities were hit. He sent thousands of troops then. He's sending the 82nd Airborne as well. He's sending them back rather than pulling them, returning them home.
Well, you know, I mean, you get taught in college and in university in your first international relations class or foreign policy class that ultimately foreign policy is an expression of domestic politics. If you look at Donald Trump's record going back to his early days campaigning back in 2015 into 2016, he is saying these types of things. We're going to end these wars. We're going to bring the troops home. He was critical of President Obama, all during President Obama's time. But then as Donald Trump starts to become involved, particularly with the major Republican donors like Sheldon Adelson, who are going to give him millions or tens of millions of dollars, you start to see this switch in policy to being very hawkish on issues regarding, say, Israel-Palestine or, say, Iran, to curry favor with his donors. It's also important to remember that Donald Trump is probably the most malleable president we've ever had. I think he had these original gut instincts or looking at American policy in the Middle East and saying, look, the costs have not do not in any way measure to the benefits, if you can call any of this any benefit, and the entire region is destabilized. You cannot provide one example of American military operations in the greater Middle East, again extending through Afghanistan and Pakistan, that have brought about stability. So I think to say the policy is confused is pretty spot on, but it's also, immoral, unjustified, and wrong-headed.
Matthew, thank you so much indeed for your contribution. We're going to let you go. That's Matthew Ho from Veterans for Peace, and we're going to be joined now. Thank you, Matthew. We're joined by Ismael Alsodani, who's a retired brigadier general in the Iraqi army, a former Iraqi defense attache to the United States. Ismael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Rob, I'm going to come to you in just a moment. I promise I'll give you some time. But Mohammed, one more question about Iran's response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani before we come to Ismael and Rob. So now it does appear, with a fifth step being taken by Tehran to pull back on further commitments to the international nuclear deal, the JCPOA, that deal is now done and dusted and gone forever. That seems to be the popular analysis. But don't you think that Iran should be looking at the response that it gives to the killing of Soleimani in the longer term, simply because of the economic pressure the country is under? Surely the thing that it needs to concentrate most on is getting those American sanctions lifted and improving the standard of living of people who can't even get basic medicines from outside the country. I totally understand there are a lot of medicines made in Iran itself, but the sanctions are biting.
Well, the Iranians are not the ones who created these provocations. The United States committed an act of war against Iranians by murdering a senior Iranian official. They committed an act of war against Iraqis by also murdering a senior Iraqi official and showing complete disregard for Iraqi sovereignty. But Iran cannot afford to appease Trump, because if they do so, he will only be encouraged to create more war crimes. I disagree with your previous guest in the sense that Iran is very powerful. Those countries that allow the United States to have military bases in their territory, if there is conflict, they will be viewed as hostile regimes. And therefore, they are highly vulnerable. The United Arab Emirates would not last for more than a few hours. I mean, it's a small country. The citizens of the United Arab Emirates are only a small fraction of the population, and it's very vulnerable. So when they allow the United States to have bases and to use those bases against Iran, then they are part of the coalition against the country. And if I was in the Emirates, I'd leave at this stage. And the same is true with Saudi Arabia. So these countries, which are completely dependent on oil, they're small, they're weak, and they're completely dependent on the United States, would not last. And there would be a global economic catastrophe if the Americans were to be foolish. And Iran, of course, has allies across the region. But also, I think the Americans should be concerned about the situation in Iraq, because they have outraged Iraqis. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have participated in these funerals in each city, and the Americans are humiliating or attempting to humiliate Iraqis. Right now, when the parliament calls for the forces to leave, Trump threatens them like some sort of godfather. Okay. He says, we'll impose sanctions even harsher than Iran. So the United States is behaving like an empire, and Trump is behaving like a global despot. And this is not something that's going to go down well with any nation in the world, any nation that has dignity.
Okay, Mohammed, if you don't mind, let's put some
has no respect for sovereignty.
Let's put some of your points that you make about Iraq to Ismael. Ismael, what is the danger here, the most significant danger for Iraq? On Friday morning, in that drone strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandis, the head of an Iranian-backed militia, was also killed. And you could see the numbers of people out in the streets for his funeral procession. Is there a danger, as one MP has said in the parliamentary debate on Sunday, that actually the Iranian-backed militias are going to become more powerful than the state?
Well, I said at the beginning, I said that this assassination of Soleimani and Abu Mahdi Mohandes will strengthen Iran inside Iraq. And unfortunately, Iran and United States wanted Iraq to be the battlefield for their conflict. And Iraq is a fragile state, has no capabilities, and their armed forces is developing. But the things are, Iraq is getting involved because we have, PMUs are, backed by the Iranian, and these PMUs formations are part of the political process as well. And then that's really one of the major issues that makes Iraq a fragile state, and the government is vulnerable to their clout. So, in fact, it is very dangerous consequences on Iraq. The miscalculation of the government and the parliament procedures would end up with Iraq is part of this turmoil in the region, and Iraq has no capability economically, politically, and militarily as well. So it is very catastrophic on the Iraqi side.
Rob, what do you make of Adil Abdul Mahdi's pretty much complaint that he has made, the Iraqi prime minister, that the Americans have basically told him, you're either with us or you're against us, because the assassination on Friday morning of at least 6 people, and the 2 important ones that we're talking about at the moment, that really seems to have basically told the Iraqi leadership, decide. Do you want to go with Tehran? Do you want to go to with Washington? Is that a wise course and a wise choice to give a country?
Well, I agree with Ismael, the general, that Iraq is very fragile at this point, and its military forces and national security apparatus is developing, and that's one of the major concerns for the United States of America. But let's get back to Iran. Iran has been at war with the United States of America under this government, the mullahs, controlled by the mullahs and backed by the IRGC for 40 years, gentlemen. It's ludicrous to say that what the United States did was anything other than a self-defense operation. I disagree with the characterization of the word assassination. It was a viable military target. Soleimani was acting directly on American forces and American territory, and we have a right to self-defense. And the big question here is the Iranians. The Iranians need to take great care in their next step, because this effort that the President of the United States just undertook is intended to de-escalate their actions that led up to the incident.
Ismael, it's interesting, isn't it, that our Iranian and American guests are talking about the confrontations between their countries, and Iraq seems to be stuck in the middle. As our Iraqi representative, have you heard any of the reports that suggest that actually Iranian influence in Iraq is so great that it's actually hampered the American fight against Daesh, that Americans have made specific requests, they've been denied the use of Iraqi airspace, they've asked to go to certain parts of the country and then been told, no, you can't go to fight there? Because if any of that is even vaguely true, it illustrates the biggest problem of this entire thing.
I think this is, I said it's, there are lots of consequences, and that wouldn't be for the interest of Iraq. There is no one can deny that the instrumental support of the United States forces and the coalition to defeat ISIS, as well as we can say that the sacrifices, the huge sacrifices of the popular mobilization forces in their fight against ISIS. Both forces were, defeating ISIS and jointly, and that is the fundamental issue. Now, after defeating ISIS, we should have worked to build the Iraq institution in a perfect way. We do not want these forces to be part of the political parties or connected to the political parties, because they will impose their power on the street. And we have witnessed in the general protests, anti-government general protests since October 1st until today, people were fed up from the government not delivering the essential services, that the political process has created a lot of corrupt political class from every color in the political process. But those who are owning the power, owning the arms in the street, are imposing something on the people. People do not want to get back to the dictatorship, and the political parties are, practicing kind of dictatorship over the people. So this is very dangerous, as I said, and that would be strengthen Iranian influence inside Iraq, because the political parties, especially the Shia political parties, are having fundamental connection and relation with Iran.
Okay, gentlemen, we have run out of time for this particular edition of the Newsmakers. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Rob, Ismail, Mohammed, again, our gratitude. It is the end of the program. Mohammed, I can see you putting your hands up, because of course you want to say more, but we only have a finite amount of time. Thank you so much indeed, all three of you. And to you, thanks very much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.